The morning light spilled into the kitchen of the small wooden house in Asheville, Georgia, seeping through the thin white curtains Sarah Emissy Allister had sewn herself 20 years ago. The light caught dust motes dancing in the air, casting a soft golden haze across the faded linoleum floor and the old oak cabinets that had once gleamed with polish. A quiet stillness hung in the room, interrupted only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a small clock above the doorframe. It was just past 6:30 a.m. Sarah stood at the corner of the kitchen near the sink, one hand resting on the chipped counter, the other brushing her fingers lightly across the edge of a small mirror nailed crookedly to the wall. The mirror had been there for years, originally used to watch her children in the backyard while she cooked. Now it served a different purpose. It was where she came every morning, long before the world awoke, to look at a face she barely recognized. Her eyes met their reflection first. Brown, wide, still soft, but not the same. The left side of her face was distorted by a tumor that had grown slowly over the past 7 years. What began as a persistent ache near her jawline had spread like a creeping shadow, disfiguring the woman she had once been. The mass bulged from beneath her skin, stretching the tissue unnaturally, pulling the corner of her mouth downward. It pressed against her cheekbone, causing her eye to appear smaller on that side. Her lips remained sealed in a soft, habitual grimace. She no longer smiled in the mirror. She rarely smiled at all. Still, she looked, every day. A cracked ceramic mug sat beside the sink, steam curling gently above the rim. Coffee, made with the last of the grounds. Sarah reached for it, wrapping her hands around the warmth, grounding herself. She took a slow sip and returned her gaze to the mirror. "I used to sing in this kitchen," she whispered, voice low and hoarse, barely audible. "I used to sing everywhere." The memories of those mornings came rushing back like sunlight through a storm. Her children eating cereal at the table, the radio humming gospel songs softly, and her own voice floating over the top, smooth and unwavering. She had once been the choir leader at the Baptist church down the road. People used to stop her in the grocery store and ask when she'd sing next. Then came the lump. At first she dismissed it. Too many other things needed her attention. The kids, the bills, her mother's worsening dementia. She didn't have time for doctors. Besides, it wasn't painful, just a little swollen. Just stress. Just life. It had taken less than a year before the lump became visible to others. By the second year, children at the store stared at her. By the third, Sarah stopped going out unless necessary. Singing? That stopped long ago. The tumor had shifted the muscles around her mouth, making it difficult to articulate words clearly. Some days, even chewing was hard. The sound of footsteps above reminded her the house was beginning to wake. Eli, her 16-year-old son, would be heading to the high school bus stop soon. Her youngest, May, likely still curled up in bed. Sarah took another sip of coffee and then reached into the cabinet for a small tin of instant oatmeal. As she poured hot water into the bowl, her mind wandered. She could still remember her last solo in church, Easter Sunday, nearly 8 years ago. The sanctuary had been full, sunlight catching the stained glass windows just right, casting blues and purples across the choir robes. She'd sung Amazing Grace, the old version, raw and full of sorrow and redemption. Her voice had soared that day. Afterward, an elderly woman hugged her and said, "You opened heaven, baby." That wasn't a song, that was a prayer. Now even humming hurt. The whistle of the kettle made her flinch. She moved to turn off the stove and returned her gaze one last time to the mirror. Her face, though misshapen, still held traces of the woman she remembered. Her skin, smooth in places, weathered in others. The faintest trace of lipstick, a habit she never fully let go of, even when there was no one around to see it. She leaned in and whispered to the mirror, as if it were a confidant, "I don't know who you are anymore, but I know you're still in there somewhere." Behind her, Eli's heavy footsteps hit the bottom stairs. She quickly adjusted her posture and pulled the oatmeal closer. She didn't want her son to see her talking to her reflection again. He already worried too much. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, grabbing his hoodie from the coat hook. "Morning, sweetheart. Oatmeal's hot if you want it." "Nah, I'm late. Gotta go." He paused at the door, hand on the knob, then glanced at her, quickly, just a flick of the eyes, before looking away again. His face held that guarded expression she'd grown to recognize. Embarrassment, frustration, maybe even guilt. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words clung to her throat like sandpaper. He left before she could find them. The door clicked shut. Sarah turned back to the mirror one last time and sighed. Maybe today, she murmured. Maybe today I'll start to change. The church sat at the corner of Pine and Lawson, its white wooden steeple stretching toward the sky like a hand reaching for heaven. It wasn't much to look at, just another country chapel surrounded by overgrown grass and a cracked parking lot. But to Sarah, it had once been her sanctuary, the place where she found her voice, and later, where she lost it. She hadn't stepped foot inside in nearly a year. That morning she lingered outside in the car longer than necessary, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people walk inside. Familiar faces, older now. The Jenkins twins, now in high school, taller than their parents. Miss Clara, who once taught Sunday school, helping a grandchild up the front steps. No one looked toward her car. No one seemed to expect her return. In the passenger seat, her youngest daughter May fidgeted with the lace trim of her dress. "Are we going in, Mama?" Sarah blinked, then nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, baby." Just waiting for the AC to finish kicking in. A harmless lie. She killed the engine and stepped out into the sticky Georgia heat. Inside, the church smelled the same, lemon wood polish and the faint musk of hymn books. The pews creaked familiarly under their weight. Sarah chose a seat near the back, out of habit and comfort, nodding politely to the occasional glance from someone who recognized her. Most didn't linger. Up front, the choir had just started rehearsing. A soft piano guided them through a familiar melody. "Come thou fount of every blessing." Sarah had led that hymn 100 times. Now she could barely hum through it. As the voices swelled, something inside her tightened. Her throat constricted, not from the tumor, but from memory. She remembered where she used to stand, right under the wooden cross, beside the old Yamaha piano. Her red choir robe, the way her hands floated when she directed the altos, the way the congregation would rise at her cue, the way voices once responded to her every movement. She was still lost in that memory when she felt a presence beside her. Reverend John, in his usual brown suit and crooked tie, smiled as he sat down. "Didn't expect to see you here today," he said gently. Sarah offered a small shrug. May wanted to come. He chuckled. "Smart girl." The choir finished the hymn, and a brief silence followed. Then Reverend John stood and walked up front. "Before we get started today," he said, "I'd like to invite someone very special to come up and help us lead one of our old favorites." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. "Miss Sarah Allister," he called, looking straight at her. "If you feel like it, no pressure." Every eye turned. She froze, heart pounding in her chest. For a moment she considered it. She could see herself walking up the aisle, taking her place again, just like old times. Her legs even twitched, ready to move. But then she caught her reflection in the polished surface of the organ. The uneven face, the weight that pulled down the left side of her jaw. She hadn't sung in years, couldn't even say the Lord's Prayer out loud without slurring. She shook her head, barely noticeable, and looked away. The Reverend didn't push. "Next time," he said kindly, and the choir moved on without her. After the service, she slipped out quickly, holding May's hand tight. But the parking lot wasn't quick enough. Eli was waiting by the car. He wasn't in church clothes. Wore his hoodie with the sleeves pushed up, earbuds dangling around his neck, eyes dark and unreadable. His posture screamed frustration, though he tried to hide it. "You didn't tell me you were coming," he said, voice low. "You had practice," Sarah replied, unlocking the door. "Didn't want to bother you." He snorted. "Yeah, 'cause nothing says bothering like bringing your messed up face to church." The words hit like a slap. May gasped, eyes wide. Sarah paused, hand still on the door handle. "I didn't mean—" Eli started, but the damage was already done. "No," Sarah said quietly. "You did." She opened the door for May, who climbed in silently, then turned to face him. Her eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. "You think I don't notice how you don't walk next to me in public? How you don't bring friends home anymore? How you act like I'm the one who should be ashamed?" He didn't answer. "I know what I look like," she whispered. "But I didn't ask for this. And I'm still your mother." Eli looked away, jaw clenched. For a second she thought he might cry. But instead, he turned and walked away, heading down the sidewalk toward the corner store. Sarah got into the driver's seat and sat for a long moment before starting the engine. Her hands trembled. Her throat ached, not from speaking, but from holding back everything she wanted to scream. The music, the memory, the humiliation, the ache of being seen and still invisible. As they pulled onto the road, May's small voice cut through the silence. "Mama," she said softly, "you don't have to sing. I still think you sound beautiful when you pray." Sarah blinked hard, her vision blurring as she reached for her daughter's hand. She didn't trust herself to speak. All she could do was squeeze and keep driving. But that night, after the kids had gone to bed, she found herself alone in the kitchen again, in front of the mirror. Same time, same cracked glass, same silence. She stared at her reflection, then softly, so soft it was almost inaudible, she tried to sing. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. The words came out broken, shaky, slurred on one side, but they came, that saved a wretch like me. She stopped, not because she couldn't go on, but because something inside her had shifted. She realized she had stopped singing not just because of the tumor, but because she believed no one wanted to hear her anymore, even she didn't. But now, the hymn wasn't for them. It was for her. The overhead lights in the surgical planning lab gave off a sterile hum, the kind that never left Gabriel Lopez entirely at ease. Even after 20 years in practice, the cold brightness of hospitals had a way of cutting deeper than scalpels. It was early, 6:10 a.m., and the building was mostly quiet, save for the occasional footsteps of night shift nurses wrapping up their rounds. Dr. Lopez sat at his desk, flipping through digital charts on his tablet. He moved quickly, fingers gliding across the screen, eyes scanning numbers and scan images with the calm focus of routine. Names came and went, faces, x-rays, treatment requests, until one case made him pause. The subject file was labeled McAllister, Sarah, a referral from a rural outreach program tied to the Mercy Care Foundation. It wasn't unusual. He received dozens of them monthly. What made him stop wasn't the name, it was the photo. His breath caught in his throat before he even registered it. On the screen was a frontal image of a woman in her mid-40s, the left side of her face visibly consumed by a large mass. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes, one slightly smaller than the other due to the pressure from the tumor, held something he couldn't look away from. They weren't pleading, they weren't even hopeful, they looked resigned. He zoomed in, unconsciously, until the screen was filled with the image of her face. The tumor distorted the natural contours of her jawline, stretched the skin toward her cheek, even reached near the lower orbit of her eye. It was grotesque, yes, but what struck him most wasn't the deformity, it was the familiarity. His mind pulled him back with cruel clarity. 10 years ago, another woman, another tumor, another operating table. Elena, her name echoed like an old hymn in a church long abandoned. She had been his patient, yes, but more than that. She was his mother. Dr. Lopez had been 37, newly appointed as head of reconstructive maxillofacial surgery at Memorial General. His mother, a vibrant woman who had spent her life teaching music to underprivileged children, had developed a slow-growing tumor in her upper palate. It had begun innocently, just a little pressure, a little bleeding when she brushed her teeth. By the time she agreed to surgery, the tumor had spread, wrapping itself around her sinus cavity and creeping dangerously close to the skull base. Gabriel had been advised to let someone else operate. Too close, his colleagues said. Too personal. But he hadn't listened. The operation went wrong 2 hours in. There was bleeding, rapid, uncontrollable. The artery they thought was safely distant ruptured under the cautery, and within minutes, his mother's oxygen levels plummeted. The team tried to stabilize her, but the bleeding led to a stroke mid-surgery. She never woke up. The hospital board ruled it a complication, not malpractice. A tragic but known risk, the report read. He was cleared professionally, but the guilt burrowed deep, setting up home in the corners of his soul. Gabriel hadn't touched another tumor of that scale since. Now, staring at Sarah M.C. Allister's photo, the past came surging forward like a tide with no shore. He minimized the image quickly, as if it burned. No, he muttered aloud. Someone else can take this one. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes and moved on to the next file, but concentration proved impossible. His mind kept returning, not to the tumor, but to her eyes. That look, it reminded him of his mother the night before surgery, when she'd whispered, "Don't let this change you." He stood, agitated, pacing the room. He told himself it wasn't personal. He was overbooked. She'd be better off with a surgeon who had distance, objectivity, clean hands. He walked to the coffee machine in the staff lounge, filled a cup halfway, and then set it down untouched. It was Reverend John who called that afternoon. "Dr. Lopez," the familiar voice crackled through the speakerphone, warm and gently southern. "I believe you just received a case from one of our own. Miss Sarah M. Allister. We've been trying to find someone for her for months." Gabriel didn't respond right away. "She's not just a patient," the Reverend continued. "She's a mother. A good one. And used to be the voice of this community." "I saw her file," Gabriel said quietly. "She's too proud to beg, so I'm doing it for her." At least take the consult. Meet her. After that, if you want to pass the case, no one will hold it against you." Gabriel stared out the window of his office, watching the afternoon sun fall across the hospital parking lot. He thought of his mother's voice singing softly while grading homework at the kitchen table. He thought of her hands conducting an invisible choir while stirring soup. He remembered how she looked just before they rolled her into the operating room. He sighed. "I'll meet her," he said. The waiting room at Mercy Care's outpatient clinic smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and old upholstery. A muted television in the corner played a morning news segment, the volume low enough to be ignored. Sarah sat stiffly in one of the plastic chairs, a clipboard on her lap, her hands resting motionless atop the paperwork she hadn't yet touched. She'd arrived 10 minutes early but had been waiting for almost 30, not that she minded. The longer she sat, the more she hoped they might forget about her. She was dressed modestly, long skirt, loose blouse with a high neckline, a scarf was tied around her hair, and another sat folded loosely over her shoulder, ready to be pulled up over her cheek if needed. The tumor on the left side of her face pulsed slightly as it always did when she was nervous. She felt it throb beneath the skin, as if it had its own heartbeat, its own will. The receptionist looked up and smiled kindly. "Miss McAllister? Dr. Lopez will see you now. Room 3, just down the hall to your left." Sarah hesitated for a second before rising. Her legs felt heavy, her steps slower than usual. As she passed the other patients, she felt their eyes. Not cruel, just curious. But she didn't meet anyone's gaze. The exam room was cold. Not physically, but in the way all medical spaces seem to be. Clean, pale, distant. A faint humming came from the overhead fluorescent lights. She sat on the edge of the padded table, clasping her hands tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breath. A gentle knock came, then the door opened. Dr. Gabriel Lopez stepped in with a tablet tucked under one arm. He was in his early 50s, perhaps older, with kind but tired eyes and salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. He wore a simple button-up shirt beneath his lab coat, and his presence filled the room without being overwhelming. "Good morning, Miss MC Allister," he said, his voice warm but measured. "I'm Dr. Lopez. Thank you for coming in." Sarah nodded politely, saying nothing. He sat across from her, not behind a desk, not behind a barrier, just across the room, at eye level. He didn't reach for her chart immediately. Instead, he folded his hands together and looked at her, not at the tumor, not at her paperwork, but at her. "I know this isn't easy," he said. She let out a soft, dry laugh. "You don't know the half of it." "Maybe not," he agreed gently. "But I've seen cases like yours before. I've treated patients with similar conditions. I know how isolating it can feel." She flinched slightly. The word similar felt hollow. No one had what she had. No one looked like she looked. "I'm not here to pressure you into anything," he continued. "Just to explain what we might be able to do. You have every right to say no." She stared at the floor. "You're just being polite." "No," he said. "I'm being honest." There was a pause. He opened the tablet and swiped to a 3D rendering, a model of a skull with a highlighted mass along the lower jawline, overlaid with possible reconstructive plans. "We've reviewed your scans. The tumor appears benign, but its size and location make it dangerous. It's impeding your ability to eat and speak. Over time, it could affect your breathing. Surgical removal is possible. It would be complex, yes, but not impossible." Sarah didn't look up. "I'm not stupid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what this would take. I've read enough. The surgery's long. There are risks. And it's expensive." "Mercy Care covers all the surgical costs through the foundation," he replied. "My time is donated. So is the OR. You wouldn't pay a cent." Her jaw tightened. "And if I die on that table? Who takes care of my kids then?" That landed like a punch. Dr. Lopez sat back slightly, taking in her fear, the way she coiled into herself like someone expecting bad news. He understood that fear. He had lived it. And not just as a surgeon. "You're right," he said quietly. "There are risks. I won't lie to you. It's a major operation, and complications are always possible. But doing nothing isn't without risk either. That tumor will continue to grow. Eventually it could cut off your airway." Sarah closed her eyes. "I've lived with this thing for 7 years," she whispered. "People stare. Kids run away. My own son won't walk next to me in public. But I've made it this far. I still get out of bed. I still cook. I still tuck my daughter in at night. And that's why I think you're strong enough to survive this," he said. She shook her head, tears welling but refusing to fall. "You don't know what I've already lost. I used to sing. I used to be someone. Now I'm just something people avoid. "You're not," he said firmly, but Sarah stood, wrapping her scarf tighter around her shoulder. "I came because Reverend John asked me to. But I can't. I won't risk it. I can't let my kids lose what little they still have left." Dr. Lopez stood as well, but didn't stop her. "If you change your mind, I'll be here." She nodded faintly, gripping the doorknob as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Before leaving, she turned slightly. "You said you've seen cases like mine before. Did they all make it?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Not all, but enough." She left without another word. The rain started just after dusk, falling in slow, steady sheets against the kitchen window. Sarah stood at the sink, staring out at the gray haze, her hands submerged in lukewarm dishwater that had long gone cold. She hadn't noticed how long she'd been standing there, the sponge idle in her hand, a half-washed plate resting at the bottom of the sink. Her body was present, but her mind was still in room 3 at Mercy Care, hearing Dr. Lopez's voice echo in her head. Doing nothing isn't without risk either. She hadn't told anyone she went, not Eli, not May, not Reverend John. She didn't want to explain her decision, didn't want to admit that fear still had her in its grip. It was easier to pretend nothing had changed. Footsteps thudded overhead, followed by the familiar creak of Eli's bedroom door. Then the sound of his voice, raised, angry, followed by the soft murmur of May's. Sarah paused, her ears sharpening. She hated eavesdropping, but something in his tone stopped her from calling out. "I don't care what she says," Eli snapped. "She's never going to get that surgery. She just sits here like everything's fine, like she doesn't know what it's like to live with this." May's reply was soft, almost inaudible. "She's trying, Eli. No, she's hiding. You think I don't see the way people look at us in town? At her?" He laughed bitterly. "I had to walk past a group of guys at school yesterday, and they started calling me half-face. Said I must be cursed. You think that doesn't get to me?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I used to be proud of her," Eli went on, his voice cracking. "She used to sing. She used to walk with her head up. Now she won't even leave the house unless it's dark. She's not even really living anymore. Just existing." May tried again. "She's scared." "Well, I'm scared too." Eli's voice broke completely now, "but no one cares about that. I have to pretend like I'm fine, like I'm not ashamed." "But I am, May. I am ashamed." The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. Her hand trembled against the edge of the counter, water dripping onto the floor as the sponge fell from her grip. Ashamed, her own son, the boy she'd raised, fed, held through fevers and nightmares, the boy who used to crawl into her lap during thunderstorms and sing with her in harmony. Ashamed. She didn't wait to hear the rest. She walked quietly into the hallway, climbed the stairs slowly, and entered her bedroom without turning on the light. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the storm outside and the tears welling inside. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of a lamp left on across the street, its light filtering through the slats in her window blinds. She sat on the edge of the bed, removed her scarf with shaking hands, and let her face rest in her palms. She didn't cry. Not yet. The sadness hadn't fully reached the surface. Instead, there was numbness, like cold water spreading through her chest. He was right. She had stopped living. It wasn't just the tumor. It was the shame, the shrinking of her world, the way she had slowly disappeared from everything she once loved. She used to sing. She used to teach music lessons to kids in the neighborhood. She used to bake for church potlucks, dance barefoot in the backyard while the kids laughed. Now she measured her day in how many steps she could take without being seen. She stood up and walked to the nightstand, opening the drawer with slow, deliberate fingers. Inside was her old leather-bound Bible, the corners worn, pages soft from years of flipping. It had belonged to her mother before her, and before that, to her grandmother. She hadn't opened it in weeks. She sat back on the bed, pulling the blanket over her shoulders like a cocoon, and let the book fall open on its own. Isaiah 4:1-10. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Sarah stared at the verse, her eyes tracing the words over and over. Fear not. She wanted to laugh. If only it were that easy. But something shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest outline of it. Like the first note of a song you hadn't heard in years but somehow still remembered. She hadn't been strong for herself in a long time. Everything she did was for the kids. Every decision she made, every compromise, every avoidance, it had all been in the name of protecting them. But maybe that protection had turned into something else, a prison, for them, and for her. She closed the Bible and placed it gently on her lap. The wind outside howled, rattling the window pane, but she didn't flinch. She thought about her mother, who had raised her alone, who had worked 3 jobs and still sang lullabies every night. She remembered once asking her how she did it. Her mother had smiled and said, "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to move while you're scared." Sarah whispered those words now, to no one but the quiet room. You just have to move. Down the hallway she heard Eli's door open again. His footsteps paused in front of her room. She didn't speak, and neither did he. But she knew he was there. She could feel his presence like a shadow. Finally his voice came, muffled through the door. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer, not because she didn't forgive him, but because she knew the apology wasn't only for her. It was for both of them. She lay back on the bed, the Bible still in her hands, and let the tears come, not heavy, not loud, but soft and slow, like the rain still tapping against the window. Outside the storm was beginning to fade. The morning arrived quietly, without fanfare. No sunbeams breaking through clouds, no dramatic farewell from the sky, just a pale, misty gray light settling over Asheville like a soft sigh. Sarah stood at the edge of her bed, suitcase already zipped and upright, her coat laid neatly across the back of the chair. She had woken before the alarm, before the birds, before anyone else in the house, though she doubted she had slept much at all. The decision had come sometime between midnight and dawn, during one of those long stretches where silence fills a room so densely it begins to feel like a presence. She had stared at the ceiling, Bible still resting on her chest, and asked herself the one question that finally mattered: what kind of mother gives up without trying? She had no answer, only movement. Downstairs, the kettle was warming. She moved through the kitchen in familiar motions, setting out May's favorite bowl, pouring cereal, slicing half a banana on top, just the way her daughter liked it. The normalcy of the task grounded her, kept her hands from shaking too much. When the kettle whistled, she poured hot water into a thermos and made weak tea. Her throat still tightened when she swallowed, but she hoped that would change soon. Upstairs, she heard May stirring. No sign of Eli. His door remained shut, locked behind whatever storm of emotion still lingered from the night before. She had written him a letter. It sat on the kitchen table, folded neatly, his name scrawled across the front in her careful cursive. The kind of handwriting people didn't teach anymore. May padded into the kitchen a few minutes later, hair tousled, eyes half open. She rubbed at her face and blinked when she saw Sarah fully dressed. "Where are you going, Mama?" Sarah crouched down so they were eye level. She brushed May's hair back gently from her forehead. "I have to go to the hospital, baby. Remember the doctor I told you about?" May nodded, suddenly alert. "The one with the kind eyes?" "Yes, him." May looked at the suitcase and then back at her mother. Her lip trembled. "Are you sick?" Sarah hesitated. "Not in the way you think, but if I don't do this now, I might get really sick later. And I need to be strong enough to stay with you and Eli for a long time." May's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she flung her arms around her mother's neck, holding tight. "Don't let them hurt you." "I won't," Sarah whispered into her daughter's hair. "They're going to help me, I promise." They sat together on the kitchen floor for a few moments, wrapped in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then Sarah stood, brushed herself off, and poured the tea into a travel mug. "You're staying with Miss Lorna for a few days," she said gently. "She'll pick you up in a little bit. You be good, okay?" May nodded solemnly. "Can I call you?" "Every day," Sarah said. "I'll miss you like crazy." She checked the clock. Her ride would arrive soon, someone from the church, sent by Reverend John. Her hands were steady now. Her heart was not. Before she walked out the door, she glanced once more at the folded letter on the table. It was short, written in a single sitting just an hour ago, sealed before she could second-guess it. "Eli, I know you're hurting. I am too. I never wanted you to feel ashamed of me. If I could have spared you that, I would have. But shame isn't what defines us. What we do next is, I'm not doing this to fix how I look. I'm doing it because I finally believe I'm still worth something. You and May, you reminded me of that, even when it hurt. I don't expect you to understand everything. But I hope one day you'll forgive me for being so afraid, and maybe even be proud. I'll be back. Love, Mom." She placed a small stone on top of the letter to keep it in place, an old habit from her mother's days. No one ignored a letter pinned by weight. Outside, the air was cool but not biting. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine. As she stood on the porch with her suitcase beside her, May waved through the window, face pressed against the glass. Sarah gave a soft wave back. She wanted to smile, to project strength, but what came instead was something quieter: stillness, resolve. A small white sedan pulled up in front of the house. Reverend John stepped out, umbrella in hand despite the dry sky. "Ready?" he asked. "No," Sarah admitted. "But I'm going anyway," he smiled. "That's good enough." She got into the car, her suitcase tucked in the back seat, and as they pulled away from the curb, she didn't look back at the house. She didn't need to. She was finally looking forward. The Mercy Care Center stood like a modern cathedral of glass and steel, gleaming under the overcast sky as Sarah stepped out of the car. It was nothing like the small clinics she'd been to in the past. The front entrance opened with a gentle whoosh, and the sterile scent of antiseptic and lavender air freshener welcomed her like a quiet handshake. Reverend John wheeled her suitcase behind her as she walked slowly toward the front desk. The woman behind the counter, wearing a soft blue uniform and round glasses, looked up and smiled. "Miss Missy Allister?" she said, her voice warm. "We've been expecting you." Sarah nodded, barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm Denise," the woman said. "I'll help get you checked in. Then we'll take you to the pre-surgical unit." Reverend John rested a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're in good hands now," he said softly. "I'll call to check in tomorrow." "Thank you," she replied. There wasn't much else she could say. Emotion threatened to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down and followed Denise through a maze of quiet hallways. The pre-surgical wing was clean and calming, with soft beige walls and paintings of trees in bloom. Sarah was led to a private room, small but comfortable. A bed with crisp white linens, a recliner by the window, a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. Denise handed her a schedule. "We've got you set up for a few things today: blood work, nutrition consult, and a meeting with your surgical coordinator. Tomorrow you'll see Dr. Lopez again for final imaging and planning. Then you'll have a few days to rest and prepare." Sarah took the paper, surprised by how neatly everything had been arranged. It felt foreign to be taken care of like this, to be the center of something that didn't require her cooking, cleaning, or fixing. After changing into a hospital-issued robe, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window until a knock came at the door. A young woman in her late 20s stepped in, her curly hair tied back in a bun, carrying a clipboard and a smoothie in a bright green cup. "Hi, Miss MC Allister. I'm Kayla, your nutritionist. We'll be working together to get your body as strong as possible before surgery." Sarah gave a polite nod. "Okay." Kayla sat down in the recliner and handed her the smoothie. "I read through your intake. You've lost a lot of weight recently, probably from not being able to chew comfortably." Sarah hesitated, then took the drink. It was thicker than she expected, but not unpleasant. Banana and peanut butter. She hadn't had either in years. "I didn't realize how weak I'd gotten until I tried climbing the stairs at home," she said quietly. "That's going to change," Kayla smiled. "We're going to build you back up. High-calorie shakes, iron supplements, protein boosters. It might not be glamorous, but it works." Sarah sipped again, a bit more confidently this time. By the end of their session, Kayla had outlined a full nutrition plan. She didn't speak to Sarah like a patient or a charity case. She spoke to her like a partner in a fight. And Sarah, for the first time in a long while, felt like someone worth fighting for. Later that afternoon, a gentle knock announced the arrival of another visitor. This time it was a woman in a burgundy cardigan, carrying a folder and a small potted plant with a sticky note that read, "You've got this." "Hi there," she said kindly. "I'm Miriam. I'm the surgical counselor. My job is to make sure you're emotionally and mentally ready for what's coming." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Is that something you can measure?" Miriam smiled. "Not with machines, but people have tells. We just talk." And talk they did. For almost an hour, Sarah opened up more than she expected. About her fears, her kids, her voice. She admitted she wasn't ready, that a part of her still wanted to run. She even confessed that she'd once practiced dying in her mind so often that the thought of surviving now felt foreign. Miriam listened without judgment, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally just holding the space with her silence. "Sarah," she said gently, "near the end, you've been carrying this alone for a long time, but healing doesn't happen in hiding. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of this chance." Those words lingered long after Miriam left the room. When evening settled in, Sarah found herself sitting by the window, looking down at the garden courtyard below. Nurses walked quietly between wings, a few patients strolled with IV poles in tow, and everything felt oddly peaceful. Dinner came on a plastic tray: chicken broth, mashed potatoes, soft bread, and another one of Kayla's smoothies. Sarah ate slowly, savoring every bite. Her body still felt tired, But it was the first time in years she didn't feel like she was merely surviving. There was a plan. There were people helping her. Strangers, yes, but kind ones. She thought of Eli, of May, of the life waiting for her beyond the scar. And for the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to believe, maybe this wasn't the end of something, maybe it was the beginning. The room was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the lights of the city flickered against the low-hanging clouds, their reflections glimmering in the wide hospital windows. It was past 10 p.m., but Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat curled in the recliner beside her bed, a blanket draped across her legs, her hands holding tightly onto her phone. The call had ended 20 minutes ago, but she still held the device like it tethered her to something solid. May had been cheerful, at least at first. She talked about school, about how Miss Lorna let her make cookies and even eat 2 before dinner. Sarah had smiled and asked questions, laughed where she was supposed to, and kept her voice steady. But then May had asked, "Will you look the same after?" Sarah had hesitated. "I'll look different, honey, but I'll still be your mom." Silence on the other end. "Will it hurt?" "Yes," she'd answered honestly, "a little. But there are people here who'll help me get better." "Promise?" "I promise." They'd said their goodnights. May's voice had grown smaller, sleepier. The call ended with one last whisper, "I love you, Mama." And then the line had gone quiet. Eli hadn't answered. She had called twice, let it ring all the way through. No voicemail, no text, just silence. It hurt more than she expected. But she didn't let herself dwell on it, not tonight. A gentle knock broke her thoughts. She looked up to see Dr. Lopez standing in the doorway, a folder under one arm, a paper coffee cup in the other. He wore no lab coat tonight, just a sweater and dark slacks, like someone visiting a friend, not a patient. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not even close. Mind if I sit?" She gestured to the chair across from her. He lowered himself into it with a soft sigh, setting the coffee on the table between them. "I did my final review of your scans," he said, tapping the folder. "Everything's ready. Your surgery starts at 7 a.m. We'll have you prepped by 6. Sarah nodded, gripping the blanket tighter. "I keep waiting to feel brave." "You are," he said. She gave a hollow laugh. "Doesn't feel like it." He was quiet for a moment, then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Can I tell you something I don't usually share with patients?" She blinked, surprised. "Okay." He looked down at his hands, as though searching for the words in the lines of his palms. "When I was your son's age," he began, "my mother was a music teacher. She led the community choir, gave free lessons to kids in the neighborhood, even worked nights just so she could afford new instruments for the school." Sarah smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone I would have liked." "She had a beautiful voice," he said, "soft like velvet, but strong. I used to sit at the top of the stairs and listen to her rehearse with the choir. She made our old house feel like a concert hall." "What happened?" Sarah asked gently. "She got sick," he said. "A tumor. Not the same kind as yours, but it grew fast, aggressive. I was in med school then, young, full of confidence, thought I could fix anything." His voice grew quieter. "She let me operate. I wasn't the lead, but I was in the room. I wanted so badly to save her. But it didn't work. Complications, bleeding. She never woke up." Sarah's breath caught. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "So am I. I spent years wondering if I'd pushed too hard, if I'd let my pride get in the way of her safety. After that, I stopped taking certain cases. Stopped listening to music for a long time, too." Sarah studied him, her voice soft. "And me? Why now?" He looked up. "Because your eyes reminded me of hers. Not in appearance, but in the way she looked at the world even at the end, with quiet strength, with faith. And because I needed to stop hiding, too." She felt tears rising, hot behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I keep thinking about what happens if I don't wake up," she whispered. "What my kids will remember. The scar, the silence. They'll remember that you tried," he said, "that you chose to fight, that you let yourself hope again." Silence settled between them for a moment, not uncomfortable but full, like the pause before the last note of a song. Then he stood. "I'll see you in the morning," he said, picking up the folder. "Try to get some rest." She nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Lopez." He smiled faintly. "Gabriel. Just Gabriel tonight." She watched him go, the door closing quietly behind him. Left alone, Sarah turned back to the window. Somewhere in the city, a taxi passed, its headlights sweeping across the hospital walls like ghosts. She pressed her palm to her chest, felt the steady thud of her heartbeat, and whispered into the night, "Don't let this be the end." Then slowly she stood, pulled back the blankets on her bed, and lay down, eyes open, breathing in the stillness. In the morning, everything would change. The hallway outside the surgical suite was still and dimly lit when Sarah was wheeled through it just after 6:15 a.m. The only sounds were the soft squeak of the gurney wheels and the steady beeping of the portable heart monitor attached to her side. She wore a blue surgical gown, her hair tucked into a disposable cap, eyes wide but silent, fixed on the ceiling tiles passing overhead like clouds. Gabriel Lopez walked beside her, clipboard in hand, his jaw tight with quiet focus. He had performed hundreds of surgeries in his life, thousands even. But this one felt different. He didn't know why. Maybe it was Sarah's eyes, maybe it was his mother's ghost, maybe it was the fact that he had dared, for the first time in a long time, to care. The surgical team was already inside, preparing the room with an orchestrated calm. Bright overhead lights glowed like twin suns above the table. Stainless steel trays glinted, lined with neatly arranged instruments. Anesthesiologist, nurses, scrub techs, everyone moved with practiced precision, the way dancers take their mark before a show. Sarah's gurney stopped beside the operating table. "You ready?" Gabriel asked softly, leaning down toward her. She nodded once. Her lips parted, as if to say something, but then closed again. Instead, she reached for his hand and squeezed, just briefly, but enough. Then she let go. Within minutes, the anesthesiologist inserted the 4-line, counted backward with her, and Sarah's eyes fluttered shut. "Okay," Gabriel said, stepping back and snapping on his gloves. "Let's begin." At exactly 7:03 a.m., the first incision was made. But the procedure had been divided into 2 simultaneous operations. At the head of the table, Dr. Lopez and his team worked meticulously to remove the tumor, which had wrapped itself around Sarah's lower jaw and crept toward her cheekbone. At the foot of the table, Dr. Chen and the plastics team carefully exposed the fibula in Sarah's right leg, preparing to harvest the bone and tissue that would become her new jaw. Everything had been mapped out using digital surgical planning weeks in advance, custom guides, 3D printed templates, even titanium plates pre-shaped for her face. But plans were just theory. This was the real world now. By the 3rd hour, tension had settled thick in the room. "Bleeder," someone called out near Sarah's neck. The suction machine whirred louder as Dr. Lopez leaned in closer. "Clamp now," he ordered. A thin artery had ruptured during the dissection, sending a steady stream of blood along the surgical field. He pinched the area with forceps, eyes narrowing, hands steady. The bleeding wasn't catastrophic, but it was dangerous, especially so early in the operation. "Pressure's dropping slightly," the anesthesiologist warned. "Hang another unit," Lopez replied. "We've got it." He worked with slow, deliberate precision, isolating the vessel and cauterizing the breach. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. A collective breath released across the room. "You good?" Dr. Chen called from the foot of the table. "For now," Gabriel answered. They pressed on. Hour 5. The tumor was half separated now, but it wasn't going easily. It clung to Sarah's mandible like ivy to a crumbling wall. The nerves were dangerously close, the mental nerve, the facial nerve. Damaging them could leave her without sensation in her lip, her chin, or worse, permanent facial paralysis. "Stay along the plane," Lopez murmured to his assistant. "Do not pull too hard." They moved like sculptors shaving clay from porcelain. Suddenly, a thin twitch ran across Sarah's cheek. "Neuromonitoring spike," a technician called out. Lopez froze. Pause. The nerve monitor lit up. High stimulation near the marginal mandibular branch. "Too close." "Okay," he whispered. "Shift trajectory. We go under, not over." Every cut now had to be microscopic in precision. Every movement measured. The room fell silent except for the soft buzz of suction and the clicking of metal against bone. At hour 6, the final segment of the tumor broke free. Gabriel stepped back, holding the mass in both gloved hands. It was heavier than expected, dense and wet, about the size of a grapefruit, and strangely silent. He looked at it for a beat too long. "Specimen to pathology," the nurse said, breaking his trance. He nodded and passed it off. His arms trembled slightly from tension and fatigue. The tumor was gone. But the hard part was just beginning. At the other end of the room, Dr. Chen had already shaped the fibula bone, using the 3D printed guides to cut exact angles. The harvested bone, with its attached vessels and skin paddle, was ready to be implanted into Sarah's jaw. The titanium plate gleamed beside it, waiting. The reconstruction phase began with careful alignment. Dr. Chen placed the bone into position, and Gabriel secured it with titanium screws. Each screw was like a promise, each plate a silent oath that she would smile again. Then came the microvascular anastomosis, connecting blood vessels no thicker than a strand of hair. Under the surgical microscope, Gabriel threaded sutures finer than silk, looping artery to artery, vein to vein. His hands ached, his eyes blurred. But he didn't stop. Hours passed. Outside the operating room, day faded to dusk. The world moved on without them. Cars, families, rain clouds. But inside, time bent around the table. By hour 11, the reconstruction was nearly complete. Pulse confirmed, the microsurgery tech announced. "We have blood flow." Gabriel allowed himself a breath. The color returned to the flap. The skin glowed faintly pink. Life was returning. "Let's begin closure," he said. They layered muscle, fascia, skin, piece by piece, like rebuilding a cathedral after war. When it was done, Sarah's face was no longer hollow where the tumor had once lived. It was full, still swollen, still raw but balanced. Human. She didn't look like a new person. She looked like herself. At 6:43 p.m., 12 hours and 40 minutes after the first incision, the operation ended. Gabriel peeled off his gloves, his scrubs soaked through at the back. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. "She's stable," the anesthesiologist confirmed. "Transfused 2 units. Good response." They wheeled Sarah out of the OR and into recovery, her vitals ticking steadily across the monitor. Gabriel stood beside her for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blankets. She looked peaceful. Tired, but peaceful. "I told you we'd try," he whispered. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Just before stepping out, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a photocopy of sheet music. Amazing Grace. He left it on the tray beside her bed. And then, for the first time in years, Gabriel Lopez let himself feel something close to Grace. The first sensation was weight. Not pain, not light, not sound, just weight. Her face felt heavy, like it had been molded in plaster and left to dry. Her limbs were distant, unreachable, as though they belonged to someone else. She floated somewhere between sleep and awareness, the air around her thick and muffled, like breathing through cotton. Then came the beeping. A soft, steady rhythm, machines whispering, monitors clicking. Someone near her said her name. "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me?" The voice was kind, female, close to her left ear. Sarah tried to open her eyes, but only one obeyed. The right eye blinked slowly, adjusting to the sterile white light above. Everything else was blurry. "You're okay," the voice reassured her. "You're in recovery. Surgery went well. You're safe." She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her mouth dry like sandpaper. Only a faint groan escaped her lips. "That's normal," the nurse said. "You've got a breathing tube in. Don't fight it. Just rest." Sarah drifted again. Not quite unconscious, not fully awake. Flashes of memory passed through her mind. Her children, the rain before dawn, the operating room lights. And then somewhere in the swirl, the image of her mother singing, "I once was lost, but now am found." She woke again later, unsure how many hours had passed. This time she felt clearer. The tube had been removed, replaced by a nasal cannula delivering cool oxygen to her lungs. Her mouth hurt. Her leg throbbed. Her face pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, tight and sore. Gabriel appeared beside her bed, still in scrubs, his hair tousled and damp with sweat, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You made it," he said softly. Sarah blinked again, slower this time. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Did it work?" Gabriel nodded, his smile restrained but full of relief. "It did. The tumor is gone. We reconstructed your jaw with the fibula. Blood flow is strong. Everything held." Sarah closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain but release. "You're going to have swelling for a while," he continued gently. "Some bruising, stitches. It won't feel real at first, but I think you're going to like the person looking back at you." She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to that hope, but her mind still wavered, uncertain. Later, in the high-dependency unit, Sarah lay propped up slightly, watching shadows shift on the ceiling as night crept over the city. A soft knock came, and a nurse entered, carrying a small square mirror covered in a cloth. "Dr. Lopez thought you might be ready," the nurse said, placing it on the bedside tray. "No pressure. Take your time." Sarah stared at it. The mirror sat untouched for hours. She couldn't bring herself to lift it. The fear had returned, not the fear of pain or death, but of change. What if she didn't recognize herself? What if she'd lost something more than just the tumor? Finally, just after midnight, with the room dim and quiet, she reached out. Her hand trembled as she peeled the cloth away. The mirror reflected only ceiling lights at first. She angled it down slowly, cautiously, like someone unwrapping a long-forgotten photograph. And then, there she was. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. The swelling distorted the finer details. Her left cheek was puffy, her jaw bruised and raw. A fine line of stitches traced along her lower face like a seam. But beneath it all, she saw symmetry. Her jawline curved again. Her mouth, though still stiff, was no longer pulled downward. Her eye wasn't hidden anymore. She covered her mouth, a soft gasp catching in her throat. She didn't look perfect. She didn't look like a magazine model. But she looked human. She looked like someone who had been restored. Emotion surged so fast she couldn't stop it. Tears spilled freely as she touched her cheek with careful fingers, feeling the shape of bone beneath the tenderness. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. A real hurt. "I'm still here," she whispered, voice hoarse but whole. The next morning, Gabriel returned to check on her. She didn't need to ask for the mirror. He saw it on the tray, uncovered, with a single tear mark on the glass. "You looked?" he asked. Sarah nodded, her eyes red-rimmed but shining. "I didn't know I missed myself until I saw me again," she said. He smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't guarded. "You're going to heal beautifully?" "Maybe not beautifully," she said, "but bravely." They both laughed softly. Gabriel pulled a small envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. It came this morning, delivered from Asheville. Her heart jumped. Inside was a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun. One had a large smile, the other had a small scar on one cheek. Underneath, in blocky handwriting, "You're still the prettiest mom. May." Sarah pressed the paper to her chest, letting the tears fall again, this time freely. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. The days that followed passed in a strange rhythm, pain and progress, small victories wrapped in exhaustion. Sarah's body began to reclaim itself piece by piece. The swelling on her face receded slowly, revealing more definition in her cheek and jaw. The bruising faded from dark purple to yellow, then to nothing at all. Eating was the first challenge. Everything had to be soft, bland, carefully measured. Kayla visited her daily, bringing high-protein soups and blended vegetables in little containers labeled with cheerful stickers. "You're healing from the inside out," she'd say with a grin, like Sarah was a garden instead of a patient. Then came the voice therapy. Her first attempt to speak clearly ended in a whisper that dissolved into a cough. Her tongue felt stiff, her mouth awkward. The inside of her cheek still tingled like it was half asleep. "Don't rush it," the therapist said gently. "Your muscles are learning all over again." So she started small, reading simple words aloud, singing a single note, blowing through a straw to rebuild breath control. At first, Sarah hated hearing herself, slurred, flat, unrecognizable. But by the end of the week, her consonants returned. Her vowels softened. Her voice was still her own, just reborn. Gabriel visited each evening, sometimes with test results, sometimes just to sit. "I'm not used to this much attention," she joked once. He'd smiled. "Get used to it. You're worth it." That night, she sat alone on her hospital bed, a tray of untouched applesauce beside her, and stared at her phone. She hadn't spoken to Eli since the day before her surgery. It had been 2 weeks. She had written him messages, saved them, deleted them, rehearsed conversations in her head, angry ones, tearful ones, quiet ones. But tonight felt different. She opened her contacts, thumb hovering over his name. Then, with a sharp breath, she pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. "Hello?" His voice. Suddenly, all the things she'd prepared to say vanished. She couldn't even find the first word. "Eli," she said softly. A pause. "Mom? I'm okay," she said quickly, before anything else. "The surgery went well. I'm still healing, but I'm okay." More silence. She could hear his breath, uneven and close to the mic. "I saw a picture," he finally said. "Miss Lorna showed me on her phone." Her heart thudded. "And I didn't know it was you at first." His voice cracked. You look like you again." She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I feel like me again, just slower, stiffer." He laughed weakly. "Well, you were never fast." She smiled, a tear sliding down her cheek. "No, I wasn't." A pause stretched between them. Then Eli's voice returned, softer. "I'm sorry I didn't call. I didn't know what to say." "I understand," she said. "I wasn't ready either." He exhaled hard, like something heavy had been sitting on his chest for weeks. "I was angry. Not just because of the tumor, because I didn't know how to help. I hated watching people stare at you. I hated pretending it didn't bother me." "I know," she whispered, "and I hated that you pretended it didn't hurt you." That part hit deep. "I thought being strong meant hiding everything," she admitted. "But it didn't make me stronger. It just made me lonely." Eli sniffed on the other end. "I was ashamed, Mom, and then I hated myself for feeling that way." Sarah closed her eyes, breathing through the ache. "I never wanted to be a burden to you." "You weren't," he said quickly. "I made you think you were, but you weren't." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. Just honest. "I missed you," he said finally. "I've been trying to help May with homework and stuff, and you're better at it." She laughed, hoarse and real. "I bet you did fine." "No, we both miss you." She could picture them. May drawing at the table, Eli watching over her with headphones slung around his neck, a house full of noise and motion waiting for her to return. "When do you come home?" he asked. "Soon. Maybe another week if all goes well." There was a long pause. Then, almost shyly, he asked, "Can I visit?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course." She didn't realize she was crying until her hand brushed the wetness on her cheek. Happy tears. Heavy tears. "Bring May," she added. "We will." They stayed on the line a few minutes longer, saying little, just listening to each other breathe. And when Sarah finally hung up, the silence in the room didn't feel lonely anymore. She turned toward the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars, and whispered, "I'm still your mother." The taxi slowed as it rounded the bend, gravel crunching beneath its tires. The house came into view, modest white siding weathered by years of rain and sun, the small porch still decorated with last year's wind chimes. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Sarah sat in the back seat, her fingers clenched around the handle of her overnight bag. Her heart beat fast and uneven, like it was trying to make sense of the moment before her. After all the hospital rooms, the machines, the mirrors, she was finally home. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "This the place?" She nodded, her voice tight. "Yeah, this is it." He helped her with her bag and offered to wait, but Sarah waved him off gently. She stood alone for a moment at the edge of the driveway, staring at the front door like it might open itself. Her breath clouded in the crisp morning air. It was colder here than in the city, sharper, more real. Then the door swung open. May ran out first, barefoot, hair wild, wearing mismatched pajamas. She stopped short halfway across the yard, frozen in place. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. Sarah dropped her bag. "May," she said softly. The girl took a single step, then another. Then she was running full speed, arms flung wide, voice cracking. "Mama!" Sarah caught her, wincing slightly as May's tiny arms wrapped around her neck. The pain in her jaw was still there, but it was drowned beneath the warmth of her daughter's body. May pulled back just enough to look at her face, really look at it. "You're pretty again," she whispered. Sarah smiled through the tears. "I was always pretty." "I know," May said, and kissed her cheek, right on the scar. Eli stood in the doorway, hands in his hoodie pockets, shoulders hunched like he wasn't sure if he should follow. Sarah caught his eyes, and everything else disappeared. He stepped off the porch slowly, walking toward her like someone approaching a fragile animal. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He just pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her shoulder. He hadn't done that since he was 10. She felt his breath hitch. He was crying, even if he tried to hide it. "I'm home," she said softly into his hair. "Yeah," he mumbled. "I missed you." They stood there like that for a long time, Sarah holding both her children, the driveway bathed in soft winter light, wind chimes singing above them. Later, inside the house, the walls felt warmer than she remembered, familiar. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. Someone had cleaned, probably Eli. A fresh towel hung over the sink. The dining table was cleared, except for a vase of wildflowers and a handmade Welcome Home Mom sign drawn in crayon. May pointed at it proudly. "I made the M all by myself." Sarah kissed her on the forehead. "It's perfect." She took slow steps through each room, the sofa where she'd spent sleepless nights, the hallway mirror she had once avoided. Now she looked into it deliberately. Her face was still healing, still marked, but it was hers, and it didn't scare her anymore. In the bathroom, she ran warm water and washed her face gently. Her hands moved slower now, more deliberately, like each motion was an act of gratitude. When she looked up again, she saw a woman who had survived herself. At lunchtime, neighbors began to arrive. Miss Lorna came first, bringing a tray of baked macaroni and 3 types of pie. "I told everyone you were coming," she said, hugging Sarah tightly. "This town's been praying for you like you're the mayor." A few more followed, Mr. and Mrs. Daniels from 2 houses down, and even quiet old Bert from across the street who never came out for anything. They sat in the kitchen, eating and laughing, telling her how brave she was. She listened quietly, still adjusting to being seen again. Not stared at, not pitied, seen. Eli hovered at her side most of the day, not too close, not too far, just present. That was more than enough. That evening, after May had fallen asleep on the couch with a juice box still in her hand, Sarah and Eli stepped out onto the porch. The stars were just starting to come out, scattered like salt across a dark tablecloth. "I thought I'd never come back here," she said, wrapping her sweater tighter around her. "I was afraid you wouldn't want to," Eli admitted. She looked at him. "I wanted to. I just didn't think I deserved to." He shook his head. "That's not true." "It felt true," she said. "For a long time." They sat in silence for a while. "I was angry at you," he finally said. "I think I told myself it was your fault, just so I didn't have to feel how scared I was." She nodded. "I know. But I was wrong." She reached over and took his hand. "We were both scared." He looked down at their intertwined fingers. "Are you scared now?" She smiled, soft and tired. "No, not anymore." They sat like that until the wind turned colder and the stars grew brighter. Inside the house, the heater hummed gently. May stirred in her sleep. A piece of crayon art fluttered on the fridge. Everything wasn't perfect, but it was whole. 1 month later, the house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees outside. Afternoon sunlight poured through the windows in slanted golden stripes, lighting up dust motes in the air like snowflakes suspended in time. Sarah sat at the dining table, a steaming cup of tea beside her, a pen in hand and a blank page in front of her. Her journal, untouched since before the surgery, lay open, waiting. She stared at the first line for a long time before finally writing, "Dear me." She paused. It felt strange to write a letter to herself, but she wasn't writing to the Sarah of now. She was writing to the woman who had once stood in the bathroom every morning, hiding from her own reflection. The woman who had grown used to flinching at her shadow. The woman who had learned to disappear so quietly, even her children didn't notice anymore. "You were brave long before you were ever beautiful again." The words surprised her, but they felt true. She kept writing. "I know you thought no one saw you, but they did. Your children saw you, the people who loved you saw you, and eventually you saw yourself again, not through the eyes of pity or fear, but through grace." She set the pen down for a moment and rubbed her left cheek. The scar had faded, though it was still visible if you looked closely. Her jawline had settled into place, the swelling gone now. She still had numbness on her chin, but it no longer frightened her. Some days, she even forgot the tumor had ever been there. May was back in school, proudly telling her classmates that her mom was part bionic. Eli had returned to being a teenager, grumbling about chores and rolling his eyes, but hugging her when no one else was watching. She reached for the pen again. "You're still healing, not just your face, but the parts of you that forgot how to trust. The parts that believed pain made you unworthy. The parts that learned silence as a survival skill." She took a sip of tea, then smiled at the sound of May singing to herself in the next room. Some pop song on the radio, out of tune and loud and perfect. "You were never broken, you were reshaped." Sarah paused, let the last sentence sit. Then she flipped to the next page, and this time, she wrote nothing. She closed the journal. This story, she thought, was better lived than written. She stood up and walked down the hallway, her bare feet brushing the hardwood floor. She stopped in front of the full-length mirror at the end of the hall, one she used to avoid like a threat. For a moment she stood still, then she faced it. Her reflection stared back, hair pulled into a soft bun, sweater sleeves rolled up, no makeup. The woman in the mirror looked tired, but calm, a little older, a little wiser, a little stronger. She touched the scar on her cheek, not with shame, but with reverence. She smiled, and for the first time in a long, long time, it didn't hurt. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She didn't hide. She simply stood there, shoulders back, eyes clear, and met herself, wholly, honestly, and without apology. A knock at the door broke the moment. May's voice called from the living room. "Mom, Miss Lorna's here." Sarah blinked, turned away from the mirror, and walked toward the front of the house. The wind chimes outside sang a gentle song as she opened the door and stepped into the afternoon sun. Behind her, in the hallway, the woman in the mirror remained, still watching, still standing, still smiling. Sometimes the most powerful transformations aren't about becoming someone new, they're about finding your way back to the person you were always meant to be. Sarah didn't just reclaim her face. She reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her right to be seen, not through the lens of pity or fear, but with quiet strength and grace. Imagine this: a woman stands alone in front of the mirror, not to fix what's broken, but to honor everything she has survived. She doesn't flinch anymore. She doesn't hide. In her reflection, she sees not what she lost, but what she found. And now, let me ask you, have you ever looked into a mirror and seen more than just a reflection? Have you ever walked through something so life-changing that you emerged on the other side, different but more yourself than ever before? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else find theirs. If this story touched you, inspired you, or stayed with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We share powerful stories like this every week. Real people, real resilience, real hope. Because sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin in the quietest places, like the moment you finally see yourself and choose not to look away.